owe no one anything except to love one another. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. Matthew's Jesus and St. Paul are dealing with similar concerns today. They are evoking, I think, that long ago Rodney King comment in the aftermath of the 1992 LA riots and his brutal beating by the LA police. Can't we all just get along? If another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. Jesus today sets out a grievance procedure for churchy folk. Only Matthew's gospel records these sayings of Jesus in just this way. Maybe some things were going on in Matthew's own church that made it important for him to write down Jesus' words about disputes between members of a community. I get it. I've been part of this fractious Anglican community my entire life. It's not a rare thing to find us in raucous, passionate disagreement. In the 1950s, the divisive issue had to do with whether black Episcopalians and white Episcopalians could belong to the same congregation. In the 60s, the war in Vietnam disturbed our peace. By the 70s, we were on the prayer book revision to yank us out of our comfortable pews. And from there on, it was non-stop ops. The ordination of women, the reality of the gay and lesbian community in the church. Once we learned about sexual orientation, then the church needed to deal with its meanings in terms of baptism, ordination, then marriage. Overall, Matthew's careful process seldom yielded the hoped-for results. Mostly, people became angry and lots of them left. Oddly enough, maybe the crusty, grumpy apostle named Paul gives us another kind of insight into our problems. The commandments, he writes, are summed up in this word: love your neighbor as yourself. When St. Paul says love your neighbor, it carries all the freight of his famous missionary journeys throughout the known world. A mission to strangers, the Gentiles, a context more global than intimate, more neighbors than his apostolic friends could ever imagine, and often they were not amused. Love your neighbor did not always characterize our struggles as Episcopalians. Often they beat each other up pretty bad. There will be a general convention in 2024, and the prospect has always made me nervous. Who really needs a gathering full of difference and indifference and passionate disagreements? The church I love threatened too often by division and doubt and despair. But I find now that General Convention 2024 doesn't seem to carry such divisive freight. They do have things to do. The House of Bishops will elect a new presiding bishop, and the House of Deputies is called upon to confirm. A group of bishops has called the convention to look at how bishops who engage in misconduct are treated. There is a perception that they largely get a pass, and yet their dioceses are left struggling to cope in the aftermath of betrayal. Oh, it will be an uncomfortable conversation, but not likely to stir up a mass exodus from our ranks. Maybe a few early retirements. The procedures for prayer book revision always evoke anxiety in the faithful, but I am not hearing a lot of hysteria from folk in the pews. Maybe 2 years of COVID and Zoom worship has reminded us that we can be pretty flexible. It appears for the moment, at least, that conflict within the church writ large will seem to dissipate. Most of us have little energy for dissension within our ranks. Not when the world, the society which surrounds us, seem to be hell-bent for devastation and division in so many terrifying ways. I would like to say that we live in a post-COVID world, but that isn't quite right. The virus is still swirling around, but more like background noise now. As the threat of the global pandemic has receded, many of us are discovering that in its wake, there remains a loss of confidence in a variety of uncertainties and a diminished stability in the structures that undergirded our society. We are immersed in a stew of unrelenting tension, crippling so powerfully marks our common life as citizens of this nation. It's obvious in our gun violence, our predatory economics, in the degradation of creation, our punitive penal system, the dysfunctional politics, and our drug epidemic. I would add our broken immigration system to that list. The label Christian now is claimed by politicians who send Christmas cards showing their spouses and children carrying assault weapons. Those who equate Christian with white supremacy, oppression of the other, harassment of the different, the burning of books, the proliferation of guns, the control of women's bodies, and the censoring of our national history. For me, the world beyond the church has become the source of my dis-ease, and certainly calls into question my capacity to love my neighbors. More kinds of neighbors than I ever imagined. So who are my neighbors now? And how can I love them? An essay written during the lockdown in the United Kingdom by the retired Archbishop of Canterbury, the Most Reverend George Lord Carey, spoke to me of the signs of the times. He suggests that the church has absented itself from the public square. He writes, are we so spiritually bankrupt that we have nothing confident to offer our world? So maybe the profound sense of helplessness I feel in the face of the crises of our time is a kind of spiritual bankruptcy, and I suspect that I am not alone in that. Archbishop Carey decided to read The Plague by Albert Camus as a lockdown discipline. That's tough. The novel portrays through the eyes of a doctor, Dr. Roux, the frightening picture of an epidemic as thousands of dead rats spread death and disease through a prosperous town. It is a metaphorical tale, says the author. We are all living through a plague that is a widespread, silent, invisible disease that may kill us at any time and destroy the lives we assumed were solid. For us, the virus has retreated, but a plague persists, and it does infect our souls and heightens our fears and deadens our hearts. After years of living abroad and covering the global war on terror, an American war correspondent, Luke Mogelson, came home in early 2020 to report on the social discord coming to the fore across the United States. He wrote a book recently published, The Storm is Here, an American Crucible. It is an eyewitness account of how, during a season of sickness, economic uncertainty, and violence, a large segment of Americans became convinced of the need to battle against dark forces plotting to take their country away from them. These people, and many others spanning the political lines, share what Mogelson describes as a diminished faith in the government as a reliable authority, whether to administer justice or to ensure their safety. He states that talk on the left and the right of a possible civil war coming to the United States at first left him amused, as every civil war he had covered around the globe had stemmed from real grievances, real oppression, and real violation. Whenever Mogelson asked frontline soldiers on any side of the civil conflict why they were fighting, they almost always responded with concrete, rational answers. It was murder, it was rape, it was loss of home. Now, he notes, were large-scale violence to erupt in this country, it would be something different. A war fueled not by injury, but by delusion. Mogelson depicts the real world as bleak as Camus' metaphorical one. Dr. Roux, in the novel, is asked what it all means. This whole thing, he says, is not about heroism. It is about decency. I do not see Matthew's prescription for conflict resolution in the Christian community making much difference in my struggles with my fellow Americans. We really cannot even get close enough for any rational conversation. We're always often afraid of each other, and mostly we despise each other. Decency will not come easily to us. But loving your neighbor does not need to be a mutual endeavor. kept us safe, who kept us fed, who showed us how decency fights a plague, even when they are often not on the receiving end of such decency. Archbishop Carey and St. Paul and Jesus leave me with two ways to move forward this morning. Are we so spiritually bankrupt that we have nothing confident to offer our world, the Archbishop asked? Well, maybe it is time to take the Christian gospel to the public square, to address the malaise that marks our society and is killing us, to dare to respond directly with the truth of Jesus in the face of hate and greed, to publicly deny ugly assumptions that co-opt Christian faith in service of power and privilege, as a mask for white supremacy and a tool of so-called Christian nationalism. And finally, the pastors and preachers of the black churches do this much better than folk like us. They learned from prophets like Amos and Isaiah and Martin Luther King. I remember when Dr. King told the truth of Jesus on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. I have a dream, he said, for all God's children. You cannot get much more public or more decent than that. So what might it look like? The 21st century faith-based movement, an ecumenical and interfaith movement, calling on folk like us to affirm inalienable rights like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all God's children. And then there's St. Paul and Jesus. Love your neighbor as yourself. Camus' doctor points to a possibility. This may seem a ridiculous idea, but the only way to fight this plague, he says, is with decency. When asked what is decency, Dr. Root replies, I can't say what it is, but in my case, it is doing my job. St. Paul has more to offer us. For salvation is nearer to us now than when we became believers. The night is far gone, the day is near. Let us then lay aside the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. Put on the Lord Jesus Christ. We usually hear this passage on the first Sunday in Advent, the Sunday that takes us our spiritual imaginations to the end of time and history, to the second coming of Christ. Out of the darkness of our world, God's new age is dawning, if not yet fully present. Salvation is drawing near, and believers are still called to live in the light of that hope. Such a claim, I think, speaks to our condition. The vocation of the church in these times, said Walter Brueggemann, is to be a community that resists denial and tells the truth, that resists despair and tells of hope. Not heroics, but decency that fights the plague infecting our souls. Decency in a world that knows too little of it, yet asks so much of us. The decency of doing our job as Christians, as a church. So my friends, put on the Lord Jesus Christ. Speak truth and offer hope to all the inhabitants of our broken world. That, my friends, is what loving our neighbor looks like now.